When people see me now, hair pulled into a lazy bun, flour on my sleeves, half-empty coffee mug beside my laptop in a cafe that smells like burnt sugar and vanilla, they never believe I was once the envy of every woman I knew. They don't see the designer gowns I wore, or the ring that cost more than my parents' house, or the way my mother cried tears of pure joy when I told her I'd said yes to him. Back then I was 26, stuck in a dead-end HR job, living in a shoebox apartment with a sink that dripped at night like some sort of Chinese water torture. I had exactly one plant dead, exactly zero savings, and exactly no clue what the hell I was doing with my life. So when Leonid Romanov, yes, that Romanov family, the ones with old money and new scandals, noticed me at a mutual friend's charity gala, I thought the universe had finally remembered I existed. He was everything my ex-boyfriends weren't, confident without being cocky, or so I thought, generous without a hint of guilt, charming in that effortless way that made waiters remember his drink order and my shoe size. He sent flowers that actually arrived on time. He opened doors. He introduced me to people I'd only seen on magazine covers, the ones who air-kissed each other while their assistants trailed behind like obedient ducklings. My mother adored him instantly. She called him Leonidushka, as if he were some precious Fabergé she could tuck into her china cabinet. My friends hated him, which they disguised as jokes about how it'll never last, or, bet he has a yacht full of side chicks. But then he'd show up at my birthday with a diamond bracelet or fly us to Prague for a long weekend, and suddenly even my most skeptical friend Anya would sigh and say, okay fine. He's perfect. So when he asked no when he staged his proposal, complete with a private rooftop, a string quartet, and a drone to capture my genuine surprise, of course I said yes. I mean, what idiot wouldn't? The wedding planning devoured my life. There were planners for the planners, mood boards and tasting menus and endless calls with my mother, who'd gone full mother of the bridezilla, inspecting every floral arrangement as if the Pope himself might drop by to bless our union. I felt like I was in a movie. A bad movie, maybe one where the lead actress is underwritten and mostly decorative, but a movie all the same. Leonid handled the big stuff. Venue, guest list, the band that cost more than my annual salary. I handled the feminine touches, as he liked to say, colors favors my dress. Sometimes I'd catch him staring at me when I fussed over fabric swatches or turned my phone off during one of his urgent calls. He'd smile, that sharp, glittering smile of his. You're going to be the perfect wife, he'd say, pressing a kiss to my forehead. I should have asked, perfect for whom? 3 weeks before the wedding, I stopped by his penthouse to drop off a folder the planner had given me. A folder I'd stupidly left in my car overnight because I was so exhausted I couldn't tell the difference between my clutch purse and my future husband's entire guest list. He wasn't expecting me. I let myself in with the key he'd given me, for emergencies only. He was in his office, dark oak walls, leather everything, whiskey decanter always half full, on the phone with someone. I heard laughter, then Leonid's voice, smooth and low like a snake sunning itself on warm stone. Of course she said yes. Please, she's a nobody. Sweet enough, pretty enough, obedient. That's all that matters. A wife for appearances, a few kids so my mother stops asking, and meanwhile I get my real fun elsewhere. You know how it works. I wish I could say I dropped the folder dramatically. I wish I could say I stormed in and called him every name I'd stored in my head for ex-boyfriends and cheating fathers and every smug bastard who ever talked down to me. But I didn't. I stood there in my kitten heels and dry clean only coat, trying to remember how to breathe. Then I turned so quietly I swear I didn't even creak the parquet, slipped back into the hallway, and waited in the elevator, staring at my reflection in the mirrored walls. I looked like a ghost wearing expensive makeup. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother, she'd have fainted. Not my friends. They'd have staged a messy intervention that Leonid would see coming from a mile away. I just smiled more brightly than ever, agreed with every plan, nodded when his mother wanted to add 200 more people to the guest list. I ordered my dream cake, my dream flowers, my dream dress, knowing full well I'd never wear it. I wish I could say it was bravery. It wasn't. It was survival instinct. Because once you hear a man you're about to marry say you're nothing but a warm body for family photos, you stop wondering if he'd be gracious about a breakup. You start wondering if he'd make you regret it. So I waited, smiled, made love to him like nothing was wrong, though I wanted to scrub my skin raw every time. And on the morning of the wedding, while my mother wept happy tears over my veil, I slipped out the back door of the bridal suite, tossed my phone in the river, and vanished. I didn't watch the news coverage of my grand betrayal. Didn't answer the calls or the messages or the screaming voicemails from my parents. I stayed with Anya in her grimy student flat for a month, eating instant noodles and sleeping on her broken couch, feeling more alive than I ever had in that gilded cage Leonid called love. My mother called me a disgrace. My father said I'd ruined them. Maybe I did. But I was free. And sometimes freedom looks like a rundown couch and sticky floors and cold noodles. Sometimes it tastes better than wedding cake. The morning after my non-wedding, I woke up on Anya's couch with a knot in my neck and an empty feeling in my chest that I still can't quite name. Relief? Regret? Maybe both. My mother had called me 23 times while I slept, her voice messages growing increasingly shrill, from tearful pleading to furious threats about how I'd humiliated her in front of half the city. Meanwhile, Leonid? Radio silence. Not a single, "Where are you?" or "Why did you do this?" You'd think a man left at the altar might at least pretend to be heartbroken. But I knew better. He wasn't heartbroken. He was embarrassed. And for someone like Leonid Romanov, embarrassment was the only real sin. Anya handed me a mug of coffee so strong it could have stripped paint. She didn't say anything, just sat across from me on the stained carpet, legs crossed like a kid, picking at a chipped nail. She'd always been like that, the friend who didn't drown you in advice or pity, but left space for you to come up for air on your own. I should call my parents, I said, even though I knew I wouldn't. You should eat something, she said. Then after a moment, "Good for you, by the way." I barked out a laugh, bitter, shaky. Good for me? Everyone hates me. Everyone always hates the girl who says no. Doesn't mean she's wrong. I wanted to hug her, but my arms felt too heavy. So I just nodded, drank the paint stripper coffee, and let her drop a stale croissant in my lap. I didn't taste it going down. I barely tasted anything for weeks after. Leonid's people reached out first. Not Leonid himself, oh no, that would have been far too human. Instead, his mother sent a carefully worded letter to my parents, an opportunity to salvage the family's reputation if I'd return quietly and make amends. Like I'd run off on some reckless bachelorette weekend and forgotten to come back for the vows. I didn't answer. My mother did, though. She called me, voice sugar sweet and shaking with rage. You selfish little girl. Do you know what you've done to us? To your father? To me. I didn't know what to say, so I just listened to her rant, staring at the mold stain on Anya's ceiling. It looked like a lopsided heart, which felt about right. You will fix this, she hissed when she ran out of steam. You will go back to Leonid and apologize. He's willing to forgive you, imagine that. A man like him, willing to forgive you. I hung up before she could finish. Turned my phone off and buried it in Anya's laundry basket. Sometimes all you can do is cut the cord before it strangles you. The weeks blurred. Anya let me stay as long as I needed, which turned into months. I got a part-time job at a bakery down the street, mostly washing dishes and wiping down sticky counters. The owner, a cranky old woman named Larissa, took one look at my useless manicured hands and said, "You'll ruin those nails in 2 days." She wasn't wrong. But I didn't care. Watching bread rise, breathing in sugar and yeast instead of anxiety, it did something to me. Made me feel useful in a way Leonid's world never did. One night, after closing, I asked Larissa if she'd ever been married. She barked out a laugh, deep and hoarse from too many cigarettes. Married twice, she said, flicking ash into an old jam jar. First one hit me. Second one stole my money and ran off with a girl half my age. Now I have this bakery. Best husband I ever had. I told her I'd almost married a man who probably would have done all three, hit me, robbed me, and replaced me the moment I turned 30. She just grunted and flicked more ash. Good thing you didn't, she said. Then she handed me a fresh loaf of rye bread, still warm. No pity. No sermon. Just bread. Sometimes that's all you need. Eventually, the tabloids moved on. There was a brief flurry of gossip columns. Runaway bride humiliates Romanovs. But even the vultures get bored when there's no fresh meat. Leonid reappeared at parties with a new model on his arm before the snow even melted that winter. He was good at that, acting like nothing touched him. Me? I stayed invisible. Clean counters, learned how to frost cupcakes, and paid Anya rent when I could. She made me promise I'd get my own place eventually. I love you, but your snoring is criminal, she teased, flicking a spoon at my head. One night, after a particularly bad shift, a customer screamed at me because we'd run out of chocolate eclairs. I sat on Larissa's back step, eating a half-burnt croissant and wondering what the hell I was doing with my life. I had no savings. My parents hadn't spoken to me in months. My ex-fiancé probably didn't even remember my name. I should have felt like a failure. But all I felt was light. Empty, yes, but light, like I'd peeled off a skin that never fit me in the first place. I thought about what it would have been like to wake up next to Leonid every day, pretending not to know he despised me behind my back. To smile at parties while he whispered in some model's ear. To become the perfect wife he could display on glossy magazine covers and discard when I bored him. I realized then, I'd rather wash dishes for Larissa forever than be Leonid's trophy for one more day. That was the night I scribbled the first draft of my plan on a napkin, my own bakery. Small, warm, and mine. Anya found me at the kitchen table at 3 a.m., surrounded by half-baked ideas and half-eaten pastries. She just grinned, kissed my forehead, and said, "There you are." I wish I could say my grand plan unfolded overnight, that I snapped my fingers and my name appeared in frosted letters above a cute little storefront window. But real life doesn't work that way, no matter how many self-help books or cheesy motivational posters try to convince you otherwise. What actually happened was this: I worked 3 jobs. I slept 4 hours a night. I wrote my bakery's business plan on the back of grocery receipts. I learned more about loans and leases in supply chains than I ever wanted to know. And every single person I told, every sane person, anyway, looked at me like I'd grown a second head. You gave up that life for this? My mother spat the one time she picked up my call, a call I made purely out of guilt, hoping maybe she'd softened. She hadn't. A bakery? You think sugar and flour will keep you warm when you're old and alone? Warmer than Leonid would have, I said, and hung up before she could retort. Larissa was the only one who didn't laugh. One night after closing, I showed her my scribbled napkin, an idea for a cafe that wasn't just sugar and coffee, but a place people wanted to linger. Warm lights. Books on the shelves. Fresh bread that smelled like home. She squinted at my terrible handwriting, took a long drag on her cigarette, and said, "If you screw it up, you can always come back and mop my floors." In Larissa speak, that was basically a blessing. Of course, my glamorous startup capital was 0. Less than 0 if you counted my student loans and the final payments on my apartment, which I'd finally moved into after Anya threatened to evict me herself for the crime of leaving tea mugs everywhere. So I begged. I borrowed. I sold every trace of my old life that still had valued designer heels, unworn cocktail dresses, that diamond bracelet Leonid gave me for my birthday, which the pawn shop lady raised her eyebrows at like I'd just handed her the crown jewels. "You sure you want to sell this, honey?" she asked, weighing it in her palm like a question mark. "I'm sure." And I was. More sure than I'd ever been about anything in my life. 6 months later, I signed the lease on a tiny corner shop that used to be a florist. The landlord was a sweaty man with bad breath who kept insisting he could do me a favor on the rent if I let him take me to dinner sometime. I pretended not to hear him and shoved the deposit in his pudgy hand before he changed his mind. When Anya and I first stepped inside, it was a wreck: dusty shelves, cracked tiles, a ceiling leak that dripped like a Chinese water torture. Ironic, right? She stood there in the middle of the chaos, arms crossed, eyebrow raised. "Seriously? This is your dream palace?" "Not yet," I said, and for the first time, I believed it wouldn't stay a wreck forever. I named it Sugar and Salt. Because that's life, isn't it? Sweet 1 minute, stinging the next. I painted the walls myself, or tried to. I'm still convinced there's more paint in my hair than on the actual walls. Anya dragged her boyfriend in on weekends to help with the heavy lifting, bribed only by stale pizza and my undying gratitude. Sometimes I'd catch them sneaking kisses when they thought I wasn't looking, her perched on the countertop, him between paint buckets. I'd roll my eyes and throw a paintbrush at them. But secretly, I loved it. Proof that not all love stories end like mine almost did. The opening day was a mess. I burned half the croissants, spilled coffee on my new apron, and nearly fainted when the credit card machine jammed during our very first sale. But people came. Not hordes, I wasn't that naive, but enough. A mother and her toddler, students with laptops, a man who stayed for 3 hours reading a dog-eared novel. When the last customer left, I locked the door, sat on the floor behind the counter, and cried until my chest ached. Happy tears. Terrified tears. They taste the same when you've spent so long choking them down. Some nights after closing, I'd lie awake in the tiny office in the back, my makeshift headquarters, wondering if Leonid ever thought about me. I doubted it. He was probably on yacht number 3, wife number 2, mistress number who even counts anymore. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I'd stayed. Maybe I'd be in Paris wearing something fabulous and smiling for the cameras dead behind the eyes. Maybe I'd be popping pills to fall asleep beside a man who couldn't even remember what my laugh sounded like. Or maybe I'd be exactly where I was anyway, scraping flour out of my hair at midnight, counting coins, exhausted but so painfully, beautifully alive. 1 year after the day I didn't show up at that marble-floored registry office, Anya burst into my cafe waving her phone like she'd found the Holy Grail. She dropped it on the counter, screen up, grinning like the cat who ate the entire canary. "You have to see this," she said. I squinted at the headline. It was one of those trashy tabloids that used to follow Leonid's every move. Romanov empire crumbles. Leonid Romanov under investigation for fraud and tax evasion. I didn't even read the article. Didn't need to. I just started laughing deep, shaking belly laughs that turned a few customers' heads. Anya laughed too, mostly at me, and for the first time since I'd walked away from my perfect prince, I felt like I could breathe all the way down to my toes. I looked around my tiny kingdom: cracked tiles, mismatched chairs, smell of burnt sugar and fresh bread. A place that would never make me rich but would always be mine. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want gold-plated anything. I just wanted this. Sugar and salt. Sweet and stinging. Honest and mine. You'd think seeing Leonid's smug face splashed across every scandal sheet in the country would feel like revenge. And it did for about 5 minutes. Anya sat on my counter, eating leftover macarons, reading the juicy bits aloud in her terrible news anchor voice. Tax evasion. Fake charities. Bribes so clumsy they could have been plot points in a B-grade mafia movie. Apparently, the Romanovs' new golden boy had been skimming money off shell companies while posing for glossy wedding features and hosting charity galas with my name printed in delicate calligraphy on the guest list. I'd almost been Mrs. Leonid Romanov, the pretty, silent accessory nodding beside him at press conferences while the whole rotten thing collapsed behind our marble kitchen island. It was funny in the dark, bitter way things are when life dodges a bullet for you. But once the headlines dulled, so did the glee. He was still rich, still connected. A scandal wouldn't kill him. Men like Leonid always landed somewhere soft, probably on another yacht, probably with another version of me perched on his arm, convinced she'd be different. It wasn't about him anymore. The real thrill was what he couldn't touch now, the fact that for once in my life, my story had nothing to do with his. After Anya left that night, I closed up sugar and salt like I always did, wiping the tables, restocking the sugar jars, humming under my breath as if the world hadn't tried to swallow me whole just a year ago. I'd added a new shelf behind the counter, crooked but sturdy. On it sat a battered old tin I'd found at a flea market, painted with faded strawberries. Inside were the tiny scraps of my dream, coins, small bills, a few crumpled notes from customers who liked to leave words instead of tips. Thank you for remembering my name. Best cinnamon rolls in town. Feels like home. Sometimes I'd open that tin when the cafe was empty just to remind myself why I did this. Not for revenge, not for my mother's grudging respect, though I knew I'd never get it, but because in that cracked tile cafe, I was someone I actually liked waking up as. My parents still hadn't visited. Not once. They'd come close. My mother called once, her voice stiff and formal as a bank notice. I heard about him, she said. The word him spat like a pit from rotten fruit. It's all over the news. People are talking. They say you must have known. I didn't, I said simply. And then, because old habits die hard, I added, I'm okay, Mom. A silence so long I could hear her breathe. Then your father wants to know if you'll come for Christmas. Christmas, as if we could pretend the last year hadn't happened. As if we could carve a turkey and not taste all the things we'd never say to each other. I told her I'd think about it. She hung up before I could. In my darker moments, the nights when the till came up short or the oven refused to cooperate, I wondered if I'd made a colossal mistake. Maybe I should have stayed. Married Leonid, smile pretty, let him cheat and lie while I drifted through glossy magazine spreads and borrowed diamonds. It would have been easier at least. But then a customer would wander in, a student so broke he'd count out coins for a single muffin, or an old woman who'd sit in the corner for hours, sipping the same cup of tea. And I'd remember that this was what I wanted. A place that felt like a refuge, even if it was held together with duct tape and half-prayers. I started baking more late at night, testing recipes that wouldn't make me rich but would make people linger. Lemon tarts. Cinnamon twists. My grandmother's honey cake, scrawled in a notebook I'd rescued from my parents' attic before they could throw it away along with everything else that didn't fit their perfect image. Sometimes I'd think about Leonid while I beat egg whites into stiff peaks. About how he'd hated messes. How he'd wrinkle his nose at flour on my sleeve or dough under my fingernails. How he'd probably call this entire place quaint in that condescending way of his, then leave a backhanded compliment about how lucky I was to have such simple dreams. I'd laugh to myself then, smearing buttercream across my apron and pipe another swirl onto a cupcake just because I could. Anya kept dragging her friends in, demanding free pastries in exchange for exposure. She was my unofficial PR machine, snapping photos of my crooked shelves and mismatched chairs for her social feeds. Sometimes I'd catch her perched at the corner table with her laptop, pretending to work but mostly eavesdropping on first dates and heartbreaks she'd relay to me later in breathless whispers. People trust you, she said once, licking frosting off her finger like a 5-year-old. They come here because it feels like you actually care if they're alive. I shrugged, brushing sugar off the counter. It's just cake, Anya. Yeah, she said. And you left a man who could buy you islands for just cake. That's why it matters. Sometimes people still asked about him. Old acquaintances, a nosy regular, once even a local reporter sniffing around for a sad where are they now piece. I heard you almost married Leonid Romanov, they'd say, eyes wide like they expected me to crumble into sobs over my latte machine. Almost, I'd say. And then I'd smile, not the polite society smile I'd mastered at his parties, but my real one, crooked teeth and all, and add, best thing I never did. And I'd mean every word. A year to the day since I ran from my own wedding, I found myself alone in my cafe after closing. The air smelled like burnt sugar and cardamom, my latest experiment, a batch of sticky buns that didn't rise quite right but tasted like a hug anyway. I wiped down the counters by habit, though the place was already spotless. I could almost hear Larissa's voice in my head. You clean like you're hiding from something, girl. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was still hiding. But at least now I chose where to hide. A tiny bell jingled over the door. My closed sign apparently meant nothing to Anya, who slipped in carrying 2 cheap plastic cups of wine and a half-eaten supermarket cake. She dumped it on the counter like an offering at a shrine. Happy non-anniversary, she declared, raising her cup in a mock toast. I couldn't help but laugh, really laugh, that unflattering, chest-deep laugh that used to embarrass me at Leonid's parties. He'd always flinch when I did that. I think that's the first red flag I ever ignored, a man who hated a woman's real laugh. Anya shoved a paper plate into my hand. Eat. Drink. Celebrate the bullet you dodged. So we sat cross-legged on the cafe floor like two kids at a slumber party, passing cheap wine and stale cake between us. Through the darkened windows I could see the street, quiet, damp with drizzle, neon reflections blinking in puddles. My whole life used to fit in rooms I hated. Now it spilled out onto a street I loved, flickering like a promise. At some point Anya asked, "Do you ever miss it?" She didn't have to clarify. It. The dresses. The parties. The illusion of security. I thought about it, really thought. I'd be lying if I said I didn't miss the comfort sometimes, the numbness of being told who to be and when to smile. There's an odd relief in never having to choose for yourself. But then I looked around my crooked little kingdom, mismatched chairs, lopsided shelf, the faint hum of the fridge that really should have been replaced months ago, and I felt my chest loosen, the way it always does when I remember that every crack and stain and wonky corner is mine. I don't miss him, I said finally. And I don't miss who I was with him. Anya grinned, mouth full of cake. Damn right. After she left, I stayed up alone, perched on the stool behind the counter with my laptop open. My inbox was full, invoices, supply orders, half-finished spreadsheets. But that night, I didn't care about numbers. I opened a blank document and started writing instead. Not business plans or grocery lists this time, but my story. The whole messy truth, the rich boy who saw me as wallpaper, the parents who thought I should be grateful for the insult, the moment I realized that no amount of money tastes better than freedom. I didn't know if I'd ever show it to anyone. Maybe someday I'd post it online, under a fake name. Maybe no one would read it. Maybe that didn't matter. Sometimes it's enough to just let the truth breathe. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. Maybe that's true. For me, my life flashed before my eyes when I decided not to die in that gilded cage Leonid had built for me, to live, really live in the mess instead. Because sometimes yes is just the easiest word in the world, the polite word, the word that keeps the peace and shuts your mother up and keeps the diamonds flowing. But no? No is freedom. No is terrifying. No rips your old life up at the seams and makes you stand there naked with your hands shaking, hoping the world doesn't eat you alive. No saved my life. No gave me this. Flour under my nails, my name on the window, my laugh too loud for polite society. A few months ago, Larissa finally came by. She hadn't retired, she'd never retire, she died covered in dough before that, but she popped her head in one rainy afternoon, muttering about how my signage was crooked and my prices too soft. She looked around, sniffed the air, sampled a bunch straight from the tray. When she was done judging every corner, she gave me the tiniest nod, flicked imaginary dust off my shoulder. Not bad, girl. Not bad at all. Coming from her, that was a standing ovation. I don't know if my parents will ever walk through that door. Maybe they will when the gossip about Leonid dries up and they need something to brag about. Maybe they won't. I don't need them to. I've got Anya showing up uninvited with cheap wine and bad jokes. I've got customers who linger because it feels safe here. I've got a tin full of thank you notes and dreams bigger than any engagement ring. I'm not rich. I'm not famous. But I'm free. So here I sit now in my tiny cafe, half a sticky bun beside my laptop, the warm hum of the oven behind me. Outside, the city is alive and uncaring. I raise my paper coffee cup to the window, to the drizzle, to the life that started the moment I said no. Because sometimes when the world shoves a glittering yes in your face, the bravest thing you can do is look it dead in the eye and say no, thank you. And mean it.